Welcome to You Don't Know Ball. Today we are going to be going over team previews for every team in the AFC North. If you haven't already seen, we've done team previews for the AFC and NFC East. We'll be doing them for every division, every single team. We've kind of gone into the draft and free agency in separate kind of areas in our discussion in the previous videos. Today what we're going to do is just kind of set our narrative for each team and then let the draft and free agency talk kind of, include itself in that naturally. So with the Baltimore Ravens, the main narrative we have for them is, can the Ravens get over the hump this year? They added Derrick Henry. They re-signed Justin Madubuike. They lose OBJ, depending on how you feel about him in a receiver spot. The main overhaul is going to be the offensive line due to the fact that they're really only keeping Tyler Linderbaum and Ronnie Stanley. It's Stanley, right? Not Staley. I always screw that up for some reason.
No, you know what's funny is I'm on the exact same boat and I do the exact same thing. And you know what? Let's just settle it once and for all, bro. I always say the same thing. It's Stanley, and I always say Staley too for whatever reason. So I owe Ronnie a little bit of an apology. You know what? We finally have it set in stone, though.
I mean, year two of this offense, which honestly I feel like they picked it up pretty quickly last year. I think my biggest thing is the fact that the O-line is going to be different, and kind of the conversation that we've talked about in the past with the Ravens of not having those weapons for Lamar. I know Mark Andrews is there. You have Zay Flowers in year two, but I just don't know how strong I feel about this receiving core. Obviously, you add Derrick Henry. I think the Ravens can get over the hump, but to me, they're one of those teams where it's like I need to see them do it because they've been very good for a very long time, and they haven't gotten to the Super Bowl yet.
Well, okay. I want to start this with a point that I feel like I've never even really connected the dots on this, but I need to, because this is something I think we all need to consider. What makes Lamar's story so interesting to this point, and so this is not only with the Ravens, but we even go back to the Louisville days. The reality of the situation here, Hunter, that I've come to is Lamar has really never had a great cast on offense surrounding him, even back to college. And we saw how it was in college with the man putting up pure video game numbers, literally playing video game football. So it's funny because you sit here and I'm sure you say, and yes, that's probably what the Ravens front office is saying as well, is they're like, well, you know what? Look, Lamar is such an electric guy. He's such a weapon. We can invest those assets into other areas, make sure we have really good trenches across the board, make sure we have everything else filled, and the receiving core can kind of just do its thing. But it's funny because we always talk about with the modern NFL, right? We're shifting more towards an area where you want to have at least one alpha dog, right? Like it doesn't have to be, as I always preach, you definitely don't need a whole room of, a whole loaded receiving room. It's a nice luxury to have. But when it comes to paying them and stuff, sometimes it can be a hindrance. But not having the alpha guy is a big deal. Like you want to at least have a guy that you're very confident throwing to on those third and longs, right? Third and short, big situations where the guy has got to make the catch. You want to have that guy. That's what the Ravens haven't had really Lamar's entire tenure. And it's what he's never even had at Louisville. He's really never had an absolute alpha dominant threat on offense alongside him. And yet he still makes it work. And again, has it worked for the Ravens up to this point? Relatively. Yeah, it works pretty well. But they haven't gotten over the hump. And I think if we go on another year of the Ravens having a fantastic regular season, getting super close, and not being able to get over the hump because we're not having playmakers make plays in the big games when it matters most, I think, it hits a point we talked about before. You got to hit the drawing point or the drawing board at some point if you're the Ravens front office and say, look, we can sacrifice a position or two that we're paying here to get Lamar his alpha guy. Because at this point, you got to be saying to yourself, if Lamar has an alpha guy or even two alpha guys on this offense, and he's already doing what he's doing without them, how much more electric can things be if we just push that a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball? That's kind of where I'm starting to become, where my argument's coming from as a fan of the NFL at this point. Because again, we see it's not that Lamar can literally be the MVP without having an alpha. Let us see what Lamar can do with an alpha on that same offense as him.
And I think, a lot of the discussion about Lamar as a running back has kind of died. Like rightfully so, if you look at it, because we saw Lamar win from the pocket last year. Lamar is a very, very good passer. He's not, a lot of people would equate, they tried to equate Justin Fields to Lamar, but they're different players, far different players. Lamar is much more effective as a passer. And ever since Lamar has come onto the Baltimore Ravens team, they have been a winning team. I think they've only had 1 year with a losing record, and that was 8-9, so damn near 500 without the extra game. And since Lamar Jackson has played in the NFL, he has led the team in passing and rushing every single year. So we can talk about an alpha, but let's talk about a run game that doesn't even exist outside of him. J.K. Dobbins has been hurt. Gus Edwards has been good. Like they've been a good rushing team, but take away Lamar's rushes, and they're probably not that good of a rushing team. I mean, obviously Gus Edwards came in, he did his job getting the touchdowns and everything like that, but I think they banked a lot on J.K. Dobbins, and I honestly think that because the Ravens did not go out and get a solidified wide receiver 2, which you could argue, Flowers is the wide receiver 2 and Andrews is the wide receiver 1 just because of how talented he is. I think they realized that like getting a dominant back in a Derrick Henry is going to force the defense to really respect the run a lot more. And now, we saw what Lamar can do from the pocket last year. I think with Henry added, I think it does give the Ravens a kind of edge that they haven't had before. And a big thing for me, Dobbs, is this is probably, would you argue, the best cast that Lamar has had on offense? I mean, now that I can think about it, outside of the offensive line, and I know we're really harping on Lamar and his weapons right now, but we know what the Ravens' defense is. Like, I'm not concerned about the defense in the slightest. It's really going to be up to the offense if they can take that next step forward in the Todd Monken offense year 2.
Well, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you say that, because that's the thing, Hunters. Let it be clear. We're not taking anything away from the Ravens defense. That's the reality, is the Ravens defense is one of the best, if not the best in the league, where you have every position filled out. And so it's like, again, to the point of, and that's why it makes it even more frustrating with what's going on the offensive side is, again, we'll use the Chiefs as the example last year. Let's be realistic here. If the Ravens win that game, there's a very good chance that they are the Super Bowl champions. And we're talking about the Ravens as Super Bowl champions. And to the point, the Ravens had played fantastic defense in that game against the Chiefs. What was the reason they didn't win the game? Lack of offensive playmaking. Matter of fact, I'll even go a little step further, that it was terrible offensive playmaking, like crucial turnovers that can't be happening from offensive playmakers, right? So when we hit this point where you're saying to yourself, legitimately, you can say if we just had one or two other guys that were making plays for us, we are probably Super Bowl champions. That hurts to look back on in retrospect. And then you have a whole nother offseason to right that wrong. And yes, you could argue to me that Derrick Henry is the one that's righting that wrong. But again, from our perspective, Hunter, we've seen the story 1,000 times. He could come in and be super productive like he's been, and he's King Henry. And I'll never doubt King Henry again, per se. But again, this is not doubt. It's just reality. He is getting older, and you never know when we are going to see that massive drop off in production. You just never know. And if it's this year, and that's where you spent the money, we're basically back to square one again. Where because here's the thing too, this is what really, really corrodes the whole thing, is that when you have a good defense that understands that all you have, and where everybody's on board with a great defensive coordinator and they've made it as far, and you're facing them in the playoffs and everybody's playing good ball in the freezing cold, and the game plan is just to basically eliminate Lamar from the game plan, and we're saying to ourselves, we know Lamar will beat us if we let him. We're not going to let Lamar do anything. Let's let everybody else make plays and beat us, and we know that they aren't going to be able to. That's quite literally where other teams are at with the Ravens right now. So you can take Lamar out the game because he's the only person you have to take out of the game on offense pretty much at this point. So if the Ravens can't fix that this year, the bottom line is it'll probably be a repeat of every other year recently. A very good team, but a team that can't get over the hump, which is why our narrative, we've been saying, Hunter, is that this defense is amazing. The offense, though, minus Lamar, is the question. And the question is, can this offense get this team over the hump? Yeah. That is yet to be determined.
I think one thing that does go in the Ravens' favor is Derrick Henry necessarily wasn't playing behind like the best offensive line. So if you want to look at, the Ravens' O-line isn't that good, like Henry, it doesn't really matter in terms of what Henry is. I think every once in a while we get a player who, obviously, Father Time is undefeated, but Henry can still be effective for what he is. And if Keaton Mitchell comes back, that thunder and lightning punch will be really effective, because Keaton Mitchell lit it up last year before I think he tore his ACL. But before we move on to our next team in the AFC North, do you have any closing thoughts on the Ravens?
It's not even really a closing thought. It's just one more thought that I wanted to offer up that I think it complements so well everything we've been saying, where the Ravens sometimes are a little bit too maybe they have too much belief in the guys they already have in house, which is what leads to the problem. Because I don't know, did you see that quote from John Harbaugh recently, where they asked him about Rashad Bateman's expectations for the season, and he said,
"Give it up, man. He's cooked. Give it up."
Basically verbatim, except I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Like, well, we expect Rashad to be one of the best guys in the entire league, and that's that. Look, coach, I really do respect the optimism and I appreciate the lifting your guys up. But there has to be a point where we look at things objectively and we say, how often do we see a guy coming in to basically contract year, needing to make a jump from being a bottom tier receiver to a top tier receiver? It just sounds really, really unrealistic. And on top of that, it also sounds like maybe we're managing assets a little bit poorly, because we got to say to ourselves at some point, we got to make an upgrade. You know what I'm saying here, Hunter? That's just kind of final thoughts. That's really where I think the Ravens have got to make an evolution here.
I think they have been quite stingy at the wide receiver position, unfortunately. I think the fact that they were able to get a first for Hollywood Brown was kind of crazy. And I think my thing is this. Like, I like the idea of taking Nate Wiggins with the 30th pick. But doesn't it kind of feel like the Ravens have only really brought in one type of receiver, like small, speedy guys?
Well, minus Rashad, but Rashad didn't work out, so it doesn't even matter.
That's what I'm saying. Like, they don't. I don't feel like they draft super well at receiver or like bring in the right guys personally. But
no, I'm with you on that. And again, because Devontae Walker does fit very much into that mold. I am still going to give him a shot because his ability to get off the press, and he has some traits that I am a big fan of. But again, we still have got to see about that. Those hands have got to make a heavy transition. There's a lot of things that have got to make a transition, including Roger Rosengartner, who's going to be a huge. If Roger Rosengartner doesn't pan out, that was it, right? That's an expensive pick where he's kind of, and I don't want to say an experiment, but super high upside. We definitely got to lower, right?
You're putting a lot of
than a lot of other tackles. I'd say that in the easiest way of saying it, the Ravens potentially had an absolutely amazing draft class, but there's definitely volatility where if some of these guys end up at their floor, well, we say, all right, we hit about 50-50 on our first 4 picks. And you know, all of a sudden, again, your roster is really good. So you're in range where that's possible. And it's not like it's even a big deal if some of these guys don't pan out. But specifically with Devontae's, you want to see Devontae's turn into an actual guy on this roster, because it really just hasn't happened for so long with any of these draft picks, minus Zay Flowers. But back to the truth about Zay, and again, as much as I love Zay in the slot, I don't know if you can consider Zay alpha dog, at least not yet. So again, as far as the Ravens offense goes, more questions than answers so far. And this season is going to be where we get our answers.